Let's start and welcome to our 15th esports lunch lecture Germany. As some or most of you know already, every month we strive to bring you closer to the specifics of esports law in Germany and the esport ecosystem in general. I today have the pleasure of replacing the head of our esport law focus group, Moritz Mina, who is in vacation this week, well deserved. And as always, there will be a 15 to 20 minute presentation, which will be recorded and uploaded to our SKW Esport Law YouTube channel in about a week. But you can be sure the question and answer session following the presentation will of course not be recorded. So that means you are completely free to ask any and all the crazy questions about the topic. So in light what it is about today, in light of the threatened walkout of the LCSPA last month, our famous Nepomuk Nothelfer, who did some lunch lectures already in the past, will talk about collective representation of players' interests, labor disputes, and unions. So, Nepomuk, over to you and have fun.
Thank you very much. Hopefully you all can hear me and see my slides. Perfect. I'll take that as a yes. So thank you very much, Andreas. First of all, the topic of today's lunch lectures is really broad, and when we talk about collective labor law, most of the countries have systems that sometimes greatly differ from each other. So please take this lunch lecture as an intro. I'm sure we will do more lunch lectures on specific topics relating to collective representation of players' interests. Let's get right into it. So first of all, who represents the interests of players in esports? This is not necessarily a legal representation. This can also be a factual representation. And of course, we start with the managers. Most of professional esports players, 99% of them have a manager. This can be a legal guardian like a parent. This can be an agent. Please check out our lunch lecture from last month about agents in esports. So the manager on the one hand, and then the focus of our today's session, our players collectives. We have one in Counter-Strike, the Counter-Strike's Professional Players Association, short CSPPA, and the LCSPA, the North American League of Championship Series Players Association. So the most important thing here is just we'll focus on the LCSPA, which is the Players Association for North American League of Legends esports. We'll get to them in a second. Also, there are esports federations. For example, the ESPD in Germany has a representative of players on its board. Not only federations, but also, and this might wonder some of you or surprise some of you, also clubs and tournament organizers in opposition to each other. For example, with the clubs, a few years back, we had the situation of schedule problems in the Counter-Strike ecosystems because we have in Counter-Strike more than one tournament organizer. And back then, scheduling was pretty hard. And then there was an open letter from a lot of the orgs. Of course, they had their own interests there as well. But of course, they were also trying to protect their players from everything health related, for example, like health risks with too much traveling. On the other hand, also the tournament organizer in opposition to the club, because not all the clubs are into protecting their players. One example would be Riot Games, publisher of League of Legends and tournament organizer of the League of Legends LEC, for example, in the EMEA region. They have in their TPA, their team participation agreement with the teams, they force the teams to have German employment contracts, fixed term, starting players, 60K minimum salary, so minimum protection standards in TPAs. And lastly, but not least, there are, of course, others. I want to highlight in Germany the Esports Player Foundation. They're doing amazing work in the space and could be a role model for different nations as well. This is a talent development foundation for the professional sector. So coaching, in-game, media training, financial support. And when last year we had one of the big scandals, one of the more bigger teams in esports in Germany didn't pay their salaries. A lot of the players turned to the Esports Player Foundation for help. So you see, this is like the landscape when we talk about representing players' interests in esports legally, but not necessarily legally. Now, when we talk about Germany, we are quite behind when it comes to labor disputes or industrial actions. Something like strikes of writers' guilds in North America. You cannot imagine that in Germany. And also the associations in traditional sports, for example, football/soccer, they've never done any industrial action in Germany. So it's always interesting in Europe to have a look, for example, to France, or out of Europe to North America. And especially North America will be our topic today, because there has been let's say, an eventful last weeks in North American League of Legends. This, by the way, is not like the first collective labor dispute we had in esports. One example 3 years ago was in Counter-Strike, where the CSPPA called for a strike in form of delaying games in the Plus Premier Fall finals. So this is not like the first one, but the most recent and probably the most interesting, and for sure the biggest collective labor dispute. This is way too much information for me to convey in such a short time. So please, if you have any more specific questions, feel free to ask them later. I just want to give you like the highlights. And the most important thing to know is that in 2018, Riot introduced their new partnership model. Teams will no longer be able to promote it between the first tier competition level and the second tier competition level. You had to buy a slot for the first tier competition level, and then you had to field an academy team for the second tier. So both of them closed ecosystems. Also, they founded and funded the Players Association. So not as a union, but as a association of players, to grant the players a voice in the room with Riot Games for the big decisions. They're not considered a union under US law, and probably not under German law, but we'll get to that in a second. So over the next years, in all the major regions, they dropped the requirement to field an academy team for the second tier competition. And they remodeled them a few times, lastly in November last year, when the NACS became the NACL. So what they did is they opened up the second tier level competition. The 10 academy teams of the first tier competition teams plus 6 additional teams. And these 6 additional teams were actually able to be relegated or promoted between the second and third tier level in League of Legends. And this was the start of a lot of teams debating with Riot for a long time to no longer have the obligation to field an academy team like the situation in all of the other major regions. So then happened what everyone was certain of would happen someday. On May 12th, Riot revamped the NACL, the second tier level, again. And this is the start of our dispute. This is when they said, and this is the most relevant for our topic, that there's no longer an obligation to field academy teams. And as a result, of course, several orgs of the first tier competition dropped out of the second tier competition. Only Evil Geniuses, FlyQuest, and Team Liquid, if I remember correctly, are still in that second tier level. All of the other ones dropped out. And the LCSPA, the Players Association, was, of course, not happy with that for multiple reasons. We'll get into that in a second. But mainly because they were not granted set seat at the table for what they were founded for. They used words like ignored, misled, and they were not in the room for this big decision. So, of course, on the same day, the Players Association answered with an open letter stating they were lied to. A lot of people are going to lose their jobs. This will destroy the NACL system, which on the one hand is the reason for, they claim, 50% of the pros in the LCS, like the prime level, the first tier esports in North American League of Legends. And they were stating that it's not the problem of the NACL, but the orgs are financially unsustainable. And as a background information, maybe orgs get between, in North America, 1 and 3 million from Riot Games. This is a fixed sum plus additional sum for depending on number of fans, of engagements, seeding, everything like this. And the Players Association was stating that they have enough money to field an academy team, but they're just misusing the money. So what they did was they give some proposals, and the too long don't read version of them is, please introduce a system that is more similar to the Valorant system, the other big esports title of Riot Games. Everyone, of course, knew that this was never going to happen because there's a big partnership system in place already, which is not compatible to the Valorant system. It's quite a different system. But these were their proposals. And 2 weeks later, these proposals became demands. Even more like instituting a 3-5 roster, a continuity rule, allow for more affiliate situation, for more cost sharing, stuff like this. And if those demands were not met, they threatened with a walk. I'm not a US lawyer, of course, is protected by US law. It's a collective labor action, but it's not a union labor dispute action, like not an industrial action. So it's protected, but it's not a union thing to do. And when Riot did not answer, they voted on it, and it passed overwhelmingly, quote unquote, with over 90%. So this was the start of everything getting quite turbulent, because over the next days, everyone, Riot, the teams, the LSPA, took action. Like reportedly, Riot told the orgs they have to field a roster, and they should just hire scabs, even after the roster lock. Some said that the requirements for players were lifted, and of course the LCSPA is trying to was trying to counteract all of that. And then the big bang happened, you could say. May 31st, Riot answered officially, postponing the LCS season and threatening to cancel the season if necessary, if they're not getting it done, if they're not getting an agreement with the Players Association. And this was like the big moment, a big defining moment, because most of the people knew that most of the players will play then. Doublelift, one of the most important or most well-known players, even said on stream that if push came to shove, he would play. So what happened then, June 9th, actually Riot and the LCSPA came to an agreement. So the season started on June 14th last week, and there will be a new business model for the NACL, improvement to the governance model. For example, the TPA I just talked about earlier, there was no TPL on the second tier level, so now they will have a TPA. Minimum of 30 days severance pay for termination without cause, creation of a working group. So they actually got, the LCSPA got quite something, but of course not what they originally wanted, which is why most of the fans or most of the community don't think that they won this dispute. But to be fair, I don't think they ever had a big chance of remodeling all of the League of Legends system. So esports needs unions. What about Germany? In Germany, we have approximately 300 players that could be considered employees, because we have the VCT EMEA, we have the LEC, we have the Prime League First Division, we have the Virtual Bundesliga, and a lot of esports teams get managed or operated out of Germany, which is why German employment law oftentimes applies or is chosen as respective jurisdiction. So there are actually quite a lot of players who could be considered employees. And of course, we have frequent reports of poor working condition in esports. This is not a German thing. There are a lot of scandals. I don't think it's specific to the esports industry, but there are certainly working conditions that could be improved. And typical union services may provide a help there. And if you have a look at the CSPPA and the LCSPA, the two players associations we talked about, they actually do offer some of these services: legal and financial advice on occupational health and safety regulation. The LCSPA, for example, created a database with information about player salaries for all the players. And the CSPPA and Counter-Strike even have two collective agreements with the two biggest tournament organizers in Counter-Strike: the Louisville Agreement, the ESL Pro Tour, and the Flashpoint League. So you might think these could be considered unions, but one important thing is, especially in Germany, the CBA system is built for two partners, employers and collective employees, most of which we are talking about is collective employees, and on the other hand, the tournament organizer. So bear that in mind. But does esports need unions? Well, esports at least could improve some of the working conditions, which does not mean that unionization of esports would be the best and next logical step, but typically their services may provide help. So are the LCSPA and the CSPPA, are they unions? Well, in Germany, first of all, the Counter-Strike one falls under Danish law and the North American one under US law. Both are not recognized as unions for what I understand in those respective jurisdictions. But let's talk about what would it be in Germany. So there's no Union Act or Collective Labor Dispute Act in Germany. There's only a code for CBAs in general. So most of the principles are shaped by case law. And the following requirements have been established by higher courts over the last decades. First of all, is you need a voluntary private law contract. This is the basis for everything you do. For example, the German Football League cannot be an association on the employment or employee side because there's a compulsory membership. This is something that they discuss in Germany. So you need a voluntary private law contract as a basis. You need a specific purpose in the statutes: protection and promotion of working and economic conditions. Also, you need a certain structure, a corporate structure, democratic decision making, for example, right of participation for members. It needs to continue to exist regardless of change of members, stuff like this. And also independence from opponents and third parties. This can mean financially, but it's not only financially. Third parties can be state, church. It could also be a publisher. Everyone who has a certain amount of power in the respective system. Because why? Well, you can only conclude working CBAs and really represent your employees, the players in this case, if you are independent. And the next step of this is the assertiveness. So you need the real power to counterweight the employer. And there's the big problem I was already mentioning in Germany with a two-party system. But even if Riot Games and let's say the teams in the LEC and the players, even if they have a CBA together, if this CBA do not fit the requirements of the TPA, the team participation agreement with Riot Games as tournament organizer, well, what's it worth? You have a CBA, but you're not able to compete in the league anymore. So this third-party influence is really, really important and really, really big. And right now, the German system does not really account for it. What you would need is a CBA between employees and employer on the one hand, and the third party, Riot Games, for example, accepting it and working those working conditions maybe into the TPA. You would need something like this. And lastly, you need to be willing to conclude a CBA, and this has to be part of your statutory duty at the end of the day. And also, this is a little bit complicated because in Germany there are two types of CBAs, and we're talking about the Tarifvertrag right now. If there are any questions regarding the bilingual system, you could call it in Germany, please feel free to ask in a second. So are the LCSPA, or would the LCSPA or the CSPPA or their equivalent be unions in Germany? Well, big problem is we don't have all the information and all the data, so it's I'm not really able to answer the question conclusively at the end of the day. But the LCSPA has certain problems. First of all, independence from opponents and third parties. We talked about it in general with the might of the publisher or the tournament organizer. Same question as in traditional sports with the leagues who also own the league as a product. And especially in LCSPA, they were founded and funded by Riot. To my knowledge, they're not funded by Riot anymore, but it's really hard to get data from it. But if they would be still funded by Riot to any degree, they are not unions at all in Germany. This would be the end of it right there. Then also assertiveness, problem with the third party, and also how many players are actually in the LCSPA. In Germany, you typically say if you have like 50% of the players of your scope, like first or second league, you can assume that they're assertive enough to really conclude functioning CBAs. And again, we have the problem that in Germany, it's this two-party system, and in your statutory as LCSPA, you would have to need this willingness to conclude a CBA. And to my knowledge, this is not in there right now. So this would be things you would have to change if you're trying to have a League of Legends LEC Players Association that is considered a union in Germany. And the CSPPA is actually more interesting because basically the same problems, but by 2019, according to an interview with their advisor, Scott Smith, they had 180 members, which could be the coverage of 50%. Pretty hard to conclude in a situation where you have not that one big league. Especially the ESL Pro League has its partner teams, but also the non-partner teams. So it's pretty hard to say how many players are there, what is the size of the pool of the players, and how many are 180 of those players. And also they have concluded collective agreements, but not with the employers. So these are typical problems you face when you would have a LCSPA or CSPPA as a German union. So as a conclusion, no unions under Danish or US law, just so-called trade associations. A German counterpart would probably right now not be a union under German law, but it really depends on the individual case and the details. So especially the CSPPA is actually quite close to being a union when it comes to formalities. The big problem would be they're not really working with the orgs or not willing to have a CBA with the orgs right now. At least there's none to my knowledge right now, only with the tournament organizers. Biggest challenges, we already had them. I have to keep my eye on the clock here as well. But in general, it would be possible to establish a union in Germany along the lines of the LCSPA and the CSPPA. And the three big questions would be, if you're trying to establish one, first of all, is it smarter to become part of a traditional union in Germany, Verdi, for example, than found a new one because there's already a lot of knowledge there, and you could have like a department for esports specific cases. 5 years ago, I did some advising when it came to Verdi, actually, so they are interested in doing this. Secondly, if you want to have an esports union and not partner with a traditional union, is the focus esports? Is it an esports union? Is it a specific genre like shooter or MOBA? Is it a specific esports title or even a specific publisher? In my opinion, I'm a big believer in the philosophy of the publisher shapes the whole ecosystem. So it would make more sense to have a publisher actually related union there. But it all has advantages and disadvantages, of course. And lastly, how can you involve the tournament organizer as a third party in your process? So your CBA is actually worth its money, and you can actually improve the situation for everyone. So 21 minutes. This would be it from me. I hope you found it interesting. Thank you very much for your time. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them now. Thanks.